Anyway, okay, good morning. Our learning is Ila Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruven, Hanasham Shavin Aliyah. We are up to Nun Gimel Amud Beis, and we are talking about what an animal is allowed to go out with. There are two things that we're going to be bouncing back and forth through. Actually, a third is going to come up as well. The main two things we've been talking about in our Mishnah is one is carrying, the idea of what an animal was considered clothing, adornment, and what is not. That's going to be that's issue number one. The other issue is the exertion that there's an isser against doing things which are which are considered extra exertion, and so especially around animals where there's I guess less of a need, the threshold is, as we'll see, is going to be a little bit different than the threshold for a person, and therefore we'll also see some isurim around exertion for an animal. Those are the two primary things. We will touch upon some other halachos as well on the way. Let's go. Amar v'lo kamia afal pishu mumcha. An animal is not allowed to go with an amulet, even if it's proven effective. So an amulet is like something written by some Kabbalists, which were far more common back in the day. A little bit after the time of Shabtai Tzvi, they kind of slowed down. There was some big controversies around amulets, and it seems like the writing of amulets kind of slowed down. But basically, we're saying an animal and amulets were given both for animals and people. And this amulet we're saying that an animal is not allowed to go out with an amulet, even if it's considered an effective amulet. Ask the Gemara about nan velo b'kamiyah mumcha. We learned in a Mishnah that a person. That you're not allowed to go out with an amulet that is not effective, hamumche shapardami, implying that an amulet that is effective, a person that you are allowed to go out with. Okay, so the Gemara is asking that on the one hand we find another Mishnah, although it's talking about people, there it says an amulet that is effective, meaning an amulet that's been proven. It's written by and the Gemara is going to go into how do you prove an amulet's effectiveness. But let's say it's written by someone who is acknowledged and it's been proven, a person who has like a good track record of their amulets working. You are allowed to go out with an amulet as long as it's considered an effective one. So the Gemara says, you're right, our Brisa, which said that an animal is not allowed to go with an amulet, it's specifically one which is written by a non-mumche. Okay, the Gemara asked, what are you talking about? The Brisa said, even though it's written by someone who's effective. So, which you can't tell me that our Brisa is talking about one which is not effective. Our Brisa said explicitly, even if it is effective. So the Gemara says no. Mumche la'adam ve'ena mumche la'behema. Our Bryce is referring to an amulet which is written or proven to be effective for a person, but not effective necessarily for an animal. The Gemara asks, is there such a thing that an amulet that is going to be effective for a person and that same amulet is not going to be effective for an animal? The Gemara says, yes. Adam de isle mazala misayele. A person who has mazel. Okay, we remember this from Bava Kama a little bit, that we talk about the fact that a person has mazel. It means they have like extra protection, and therefore the threshold for a kamiyah helping them is going to be much lower, since they already have much more help from God. Therefore, the kamiyah for a person, you don't need it to be such a good kamiyah. Whereas for behemah, whereas an animal which does not have mazel, it's possible that a kamiyah which is perfect for a person is not going to be effective for an animal. And again, so therefore, before we finish off the Gemara basically saying that when the Brisa said that an animal is not allowed to go out with a kamiyah, we're saying even if it's effective, not for an animal, but even if it's effective for a behema, even if it's effective for an adam, for a person, and not effective for an animal, it's not allowed to go out with it. However, implication if it's mumche lebehema, if it's a good kamiyah for an animal, then it could go out with it. Ask the Gemara, ihachi mai zeh chomer. The Brisa said, right after that statement of kamiyah, it said that this regarding kamiyah is a stringency, but more stringent by animals than it is by a person. And now we're saying the truth is people and animals are the same. Both animals and people are allowed to go out with the kamiyah that works for them, and not a kamiyah that doesn't work for them. So we're saying, a behema, you go out with a good kamiyah, that's good for you. Adam, you go out with a good kamiyah, that works for you. By behema, we're saying a kamiyah that's good for Adam is not good for behema. Okay, that's not more stringent by animals than it is for people. It's just basically saying kamiyahs that are good. And fine. So Gemara says, mi savras a kamiyah kai, a sandal kai. Those words of saying that this is a stringency that applies for an animal more than a person is not going on kamiyas, because you're right, the principles of kamiyah are the same for both people and animals. It's going on the sandal. The sandal means a shoe. That an animal, which is being taught, is not allowed to go with a shoe. A person, of course, is allowed to go with a shoe. And we're saying that, the idea of sandal, that's the stringency, that's more stringent by animals than it is by people. Okay? So the bottom line is, the principle is, a kamiyah, you're allowed to go with a kamiyah, you're allowed to go with an amulet, as long as it's a good amulet for you. As to be written by an expert for you, and if you, so therefore an animal is allowed to go out with a good kamiyah that's proven to work for animals. A person is allowed to go out with a good kamiyah that's proven to work for people, but an animal cannot go out with a kamiyah that's been proven to work for people because it may not work for animals. Yeah.
I was just going to say about the shoes. We're saying not like horseshoes, were like they're necessary.
It seems like we're saying it's not necessary, it's extra. Well, we saw, okay, so the fact that it's comfort is not necessarily going to be enough, but it seems,
relieves from suffering.
It does, but there is a concern, as Rashi points out, that with the shoe of the animal, that it might fall off, and therefore that's going to be a concern, and you might put it back on. So theoretically it would be okay, or in other words, or if you had some way, we're not going to make exceptions, but you have something which is tied on tightly, it'd be okay. But if it's something which is going to come on and off, or potentially come on and off, it'd be a problem.
A horseshoe, that's not going to fall.
Like a full horseshoe. So it could be a sandal, right? So it could be a sandal. I'm not 100% sure. It could be a sandal is a different type of thing, which is more common for it to fall off. Not 100% sure. But basically we're talking about something which is a concern to fall off. Whereas with people, you could wear, what do they call them? Slides, right? I'm saying you can wear something, you can wear whatever. You can wear things even if they're not necessarily so firm, but people, they're not going to let their shoes fall off. It's not going to happen, and therefore it's allowed. Okay, now we're going to go back. We had a discussion between Rav and Shmuel. They both said that a person on Shabbos is allowed to do activity. Now we're going back not for carrying, but more for the idea of what's excessive activity. And we said something which could be that if it's taking away pain, both Rav and Shmuel said it's allowed. If you recall, Rav said, though, not only for pain, but you're even allowed to do things which add benefit, like enhance its pleasure, right? But everyone agreed you're allowed to do things which are alleviating the pain. Excuse me. It's one of those allergy days. Seems like the allergy season doesn't end in Baltimore. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fine. Tashma. Sachin umefarkisin la'adam. A person's allowed to anoint a sore with oil and scrape off a scab for a person. Vein sachin umefarkisin lahema, but you're not allowed to anoint a sore with oil or scrape off a scab for an animal. My lav dikamaka. We're not talking about a case where there is a wound, and therefore mishum tsar, and you're basically alleviating pain. This is a question, therefore, on both Rav and Shmuel, who said you're allowed to do things which alleviate pain. The Gemara says, lo, de gamer maka, the pain, the wound is healed. Umishum tanog, and now it's just like extra. In other words, sometimes you have a scab where it's still like, it's still considered a wound, and sometimes it's just like completely left over. It's like itchy. Okay, so the Gemara is saying, the Bryce is saying, if it's there and it's going to help this person the animal still has the wound, and it's alleviating suffering. Okay, if it's a good idea or not a good idea to take off the scab, we could debate. But the point is that you're doing it just to alleviate suffering, then it's permitted because they both agree it's permitted. When's it not allowed? When you're taking it off just because for extra comfort, it's just now like a little itchy or whatever it is, makes it feel a little better. That is what the Bryce is saying it's usher. Now, this Bryce therefore is not a question anymore on Rav and Shmuel's view about alleviating suffering. It is a question on Rav's view, who said you're allowed to do things for extra pleasure. So the Rishonim points out, and the Gemara says this in a number of places, that Rav, the terminology the Gemara uses is Rav Tanahu Palig. Rav lives at the transition stage between Tanaim and Amoraim, and the Gemara a number of times points out that although it's not ideal to lay things out this way, but Rav is in some ways connected to that earlier generation, and therefore he theoretically could argue with Tanaim that are found in Mishnayos or Braisos. Okay, another question in this view: Tashma behema she'achaz adam, an animal that has congestion of blood. Okay. Some form of illness. A person, we're not allowed to cause it, hold it in cold water to cool it off. Adam shachzodam, a person who has this same issue, you're allowed to put him in cold water to cool him off. Okay, so basically, what do you see? Now, clearly, this congestion of blood is suffering. It's a form of an illness. And we see by an animal, you're not allowed to do this. Clearly, the Bryce over here is saying that even to alleviate suffering is forbidden. Amar Ula, no. This case is unique. Gezer mishum shchikas samamanim. We're talking about a case where there is, the concern over here is that because you're doing something for medicinal purposes, it's something which is for medicinal purposes, and there's a concern it might get mixed up with a biblical medicinal, function, which is crushing crushing the different ingredients for medicines, and therefore as a gzera to crushing things for medicine, that's why you're not allowed to do so. Okay, so this comes.
Should be a problem for people too.
Ask the Gemara. Fine, we'll come back and find. Yeah, Gemara asks Yihachi Adam Nami for people to. Yeah. Good. Adam near Kamekar. So we say no for a person. It's going to be permitted because it could be seen as the person just cooling off. In other words, you see the person standing under cold water. What are they doing? They're just cooling off. They're not doing anything for medicine. So Gemara says Yihachi behema Nami near Kamekar. Fine, say the same thing about an animal. The animal is just cooling off. Ain Mekar behema. So. A person does not, a person does not typically hold their animal under hot. Well, now, an animal might cool itself off, okay? But a person's not going to hold their animal under cold water to cool it off. That would look weird. There, you're doing it for a specific purpose. For a person, a person standing under cold water, maybe, for who knows what the reason is, it could be the person just cooling themselves off. So this is, we're going to come back to these principles when we're going to talk about medicine in more detail. But, we know that this gezerah of shchikas amanim, of crushing up the ingredients, again, which is biblical, has many ramifications for taking pills, right? On Shabbos, a person's not allowed to take, medicine. I shouldn't say it like that. There many medicine. A person is ill in a situation where they're taking regular medicine for whatever thing. Keep on taking your medicine. But where it comes up is when a person's like in this middle zone. I mean, the person's bedridden. You're allowed to take Tylenol, Advil, etc. But if a person is in a situation where they have a headache, and during the week I would throw pop to Tylenol and go on with my day, pop to Advil. But on Shabbos you're not allowed to do so. On Shabbos you're not allowed to do, and again, unless you're bedridden. I'm not talking about regular medicines you're taking every day, but in a situation where a person has like a mild headache and they would normally pop to Advil, you can't do so on Shabbos because of this gezerah of shchikas samamanim. Okay? You're not allowed to do things. So if a person's in a very ill state, you're allowed to do a lot of things. If a person's in this medium state, you're not allowed to do things. The one exception, or not going to apply to Advil, but with medicines that it could be you're doing it for medicinal purposes, it could be you're doing it for something else. So a good example of this is like a cough medicine. So like Ricola. So you have a sore throat. So just to take if you have something tasteless or some medicine which is going to make your throat feel better, can't do it. But what you're allowed to do, if it's something which is like sweet tasting, like Ricola's, I don't know, the Ricola medicine, so the candies, so you can pop it because you want a candy. You could take it because your throat's hurting. That's already permitted, similar to cooling off, because there it could be interpreted both ways and not necessarily seen as medicinal purposes. Okay, fine. We'll come back, we'll discuss those things in more detail as we continue the Masechta. Ask the Gemara, V'lebehema migazrinan. We have a more general question. So basically what we're saying over here is that the reason you can't go ahead and put it under cold water is a gezerah for animals. And the Gemara asks a very broad question: do you even make gezerahs when it comes to animals? In other words, by people we make gezerahs. Do you make gezerahs by animals? Vatanya, we have a brayso which seems to say you do not. Why? Because it says an animal is standing outside of the tchum Shabbos, right? You're allowed to have 2,000 amos outside of the tchum. Kore lavihiba. The brayso says a person's allowed to call to the animal and bring it back within the tchum. Right? So in other words, the animal is outside the tchum. It's not really, so it went beyond where you were supposed to allow it to go, and you can't go from outside the tchum into the tchum, so you're not allowed to move it, but you call it, you say, hey, Betsy, or Bessie, whatever it is, and the animal comes, you're good to go. And we do not decree that the owner is forbidden to call it because he might walk it outside the tchum and bring it back inside, which would be an isser. So you see that you do not make gezerahs for animals. Okay, so my answer is Amravina. It gives a very interesting case. We're talking about a case where the animal's boundary, the animal is out of its boundary, but it's still within the person's boundary. So what that means is as follows. Normally your animal has the same boundaries as you do. However, in a case where you lent your animal out or you gave your animal to someone else to hold, to watch, then your animal has its tchum based on whoever's watching it. So let's say you have an animal which a shepherd's watching. Shabbos begins, the shepherd is in one place, you're in another place. So the shepherd's tchum the animal's tchum is going to be different than your tchum because it was under the watch of the shepherd. Now on Shabbos I find out that my animal went outside the tchum, its tchum, so I'm allowed to go there, and I'm allowed to ask it to bring it back in by calling it. Now, the case that we're talking about, says Ravina, is a case where it's still within my tchum. It's outside of its tchum, but it's still within my tchum. And therefore, even if I end up grabbing it, it would not be the same level of isser, because really, granted, it's outside of its tchum, it's not outside of my tchum, and therefore I would not be doing anything wrong for myself by doing so, and therefore that's the case it's allowed. But you're right, technically, if it had the same tchum as me, then I would not be allowed to call it back in. There would be a gezerah in that case. The bottom line is the Gemara is saying that we do make gezerahs for animals. That case, this exceptional case where the tchum of the person, where the person's calling it from, it's really still in the tchum of the person, and therefore therefore there's not the same level of Isser. Okay.
It seems like the way that we usually see the reasoning is that you wouldn't be able to go get it even if it's outside of its home within yours, because you may come to go outside your own home to bring it back. So it ends up being more of a gezerah for the person in that case, because we're worried that the person is going to...
Yes, it's always going... So let's just to clarify, when we say do we make zeros for animals, it's always going to be, we're not afraid animals are going to learn from one case to another, et cetera, et cetera. It's always going to be the animals in regards to the person.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're saying reasoning that seems to be the opposite of how we usually would see these extensions of the concern, because it's within your tchum, but the animal's outside of it. This is okay, but it could just as easily see an explanation that would say, because you may go outside of yours trying to get it back, then you shouldn't do it.
Again, we're talking about a case where, in this particular case, if you were to, there is no concern in this case that you would do something forbidden.
But you could do something very similar and get
okay,
outside.
That'd be already a step further.
Right, but we often make gezerah to keep you away from that.
Okay, but the point is that this particular case is not going to be a case where there would be gezerah. And the Gemara is saying, yeah, and a case would be somewhat similar. You move the line over a little bit, you wouldn't make the gezerah. Okay, Gemara's going to go into a little bit more about medicinal things, what can and cannot be done for animals. The whole question about rabbinic decrees when it comes to grinding medicines, as it relates to animals, that in itself is a machlokas tanaim. The Tanya, we have a brayso behema she'achla karshinin, an animal which ate too much karshinin. Karshinin is a type of vegetables, vetches, okay, basically eats too much and now has a stomachache, but it's bloated, it's constipated. So lo yiritzena b'chatzar b'shvil shetzrapi. A person should not force the animal to run around the courtyard in order to loosen its bowels. Rabbi Oshia matir, Rabbi Oshia says you're allowed to do so. So you have machlokas over here, right? This is medicinal. Now again, you're not doing anything that's medicinal per se. You're basically just causing it to run around, but it's a form of medicine. It's a form of healing, and we see there is a machlokas tanaim whether or not we are concerned that if you're allowed to do this, you're going to come to do other medicinal things which would be biblical, and so you have machlokas tanaim and Jarash Rav Alach Rabbi Yoshia, the Lachas like Rabbi Yoshia, who allows this. Meaning, we do not make a decree about for an animal when it comes to medicine. Okay, for people, as we said earlier, for Tylenol, etc., we do. Okay, Amar Mar lo yetzi hazav b'kishalo. Now we go on. We return to the brayso that we quoted earlier, and it talks about a zav. A zav is not allowed to go with his pouch. We spoke about that in more detail earlier. V'lo izim b'kishta b'dadein, and goats are not allowed to go with a pouch on their udders. About Tanya, we have a stira, we have a contradiction. We have another brayso which said yotzos izim b'kishta b'dadein, that goats are allowed to go with pouches on their udders. Which one is it? One brayso says they cannot. One brayso says they can. Rav Yehuda lo kasha hadam hadek hadam hadek. Rav Yehuda says no. One case is when they are tied securely, and one case is when they are not tied securely. When they're tied securely, we're not afraid they're going to fall off. When they're not tied securely, then we are afraid they're going to fall off. Rav Yosef Amar, Tanai Shaklas Me'alma, did you remove all the Tanaim from the world? In other words, again, these are just Tanaim speaking sharply to one another. Or Amoraim, he says, what are you doing over here? He says, did you forget like other Tanaim exist? Like why are you so limiting? There's a bunch of opinions about this from a Mishnah, which we learned earlier. So why are you ignoring all those Tanaim? We had the Mishnah which said like this: Ha'izim yotzes churos. The goats are allowed to go out with their pouches tied to their udders. Rav Yossi and Rav Yossi said they are not allowed to. The only thing you're allowed to have is the ewes that go out fastened, but they're not allowed to go out their pouches tied. And Rav Yehuda Omer izim yotzes churos liyavish avlo lechalev. And Rabbi Yehuda distinguished between the ones that are very tight, i.e. for their milk, and not the ones that catch milk, which are light. So the point is, Rav Yosef is pointing out that why are you giving this answer, saying this and that? Basically, just tied. We have two brysas. Say one is going like let's say like Rav Yossi, who said that they can't go out with pouches at all, and the other is going like the Tanakama, who said that they can go out with pouches. In other words, why are you figuring out this way to dance around it? We know they're different tanaim, so just associate the Mishnahs different tanaim. V'bay sema, the Gemara says Hava Rabbi Yehuda, or you could say that both these brysas are the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. V'lokasha kan liyabish, the one that says you're allowed to go out the pouch is when it's going for drying it up. Kan lichalev, the bryce that says it's forbidden is when it's collecting milk. Bottom line is just tie it up with the tanaim. no pun intended. Just associate with Tanaim and don't just make a new answer. Just we already have Machlokas Tanaim. Tanya, I'm Rabbi Yehuda. We have a brisa that is ties somewhat to this ties to this discussion. Ma'aseh Izim based Antochia. There are goats that lived in Antochia. Shehudadem Gasim. That their udders were very large. Okay, they were dragging on the ground. So va'asu lahen kisim kadesh lo yitarsu dadan, and they made pouches to hold up the udders, and that Rabbi Yehuda says was allowed. Why? Because they're tying them tightly to hold them up, so that they wouldn't scratch, and therefore that's a case that's allowed. Again, for milk, if it's catching milk, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that it's not allowed, but this is a case where it is allowed because it's allowed because presumably it's going to be tied tightly because the purpose of this was to ensure that the udders were not scratching on the ground, and that is another case which Rabbi Yehuda would allow. Tana Rabbanan, we have a story about udders, so to speak. Gemara talks about a person whose wife died. Okay, she died after childbirth, and she left a son who needed to nurse. And he was poor. He had no money to pay a wet nurse. A miracle happened, and basically he had breasts like a woman. And he nursed a son. Okay, a miracle. Okay, Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, "Wow, look how great this person is." Because that such a miracle took place to the person. How inferior is this person? That the natural order had to change for him. Okay, so what's going on? We understand Rav Yosef. He says, "Wow, this person's amazing. A miracle took place." But what's Abaye arguing? Abaye is arguing the way that some understand this is that Hashem created a world not to go into miracles. Hashem wants a world to function without miracles. We have what the Ramban and others talk about, like hidden miracles. Hashem acts with us in a hidden way. But for a miracle to take place, that's a big deal. It's not the way Hashem wants the world to function. And when it does have to function that way, it actually takes away from a person's schar. It takes away from a person's reward. And therefore, we're saying this person lost out. They could have had like miracle, things happening in a normal way. The person could have gotten a job, and which would have been great. The miracle, you don't want a miracle. A miracle taking place actually detracts from a person's ultimate schar, and therefore, says Abaye, it's not a good sign. Rav Yehuda, look how difficult it is to get food or to get a job. This person, right? Hashem could have, it would have been easier for it should have been better for the person to get a job. Instead, Hashem had to change all of Siddur Bereshis. Amar Nachman, Teda Misrach Shnisav Lo Ibra Mizona. Right? What you see from here is that you see this not just from here, but you see many cases where a person's life is in danger and somehow they're saved. But so many people who want a job don't have a job. So you see that you see how difficult it is to actually have mizonos, to get food. Tana Rabbanan. Okay, we got to finish quickly. Okay, the person married a woman whose hand had been cut off. He didn't know that her hand was cut off until the day she died. See how modest this person was. That the husband did not see her hand missing. He says, what do you mean? She's hiding her hand. That's not like modesty. She's hiding it because she doesn't want people to see it. Rather, how modest the man is, he wasn't looking at his wife. Okay, a big discussion. You're actually not allowed to get married without knowing, your spouse. If a spouse has like some, significant, unique thing, you should know about it. And the Gemara, the Rishonim discuss how this man did not know it. Let's keep on reading. Zcharim yotzim levuvin. Rams are allowed to go out attached. My levuvin amravhuna tutre. It means that they're tied together. Rams would travel typically tied together in pairs. My mashma levuvin lishne kuruvehu. Where do you see that this terminology of levuvin means they're close? Tichsivli bavtani achosi kala. You captured my heart, my sister, my bride. From the word lave. Lave, you feel attached to someone. I'm heart. You're hearted with someone. You're attached to the person. Fine. Ula Amar. He says no. Levuvin is not the things which tie them together. Rather, orish karshim kenega libam. It's a piece of leather that's tied over their hearts so that wolves will not fall upon them. So what that means is that when the wolves attack the rams, what they do is they lift themselves up, and what the wolf would typically do is go scratch, basically attack their heart. So they would wear this, like basically it's a shield covering their heart to protect themselves. Gemara asks, what's going on? It says that males are allowed to wear them, but females are not. So why? Only males fight, wolves only attack males, not females? No, because the males go at the head of the flock. We ask the Gemara, they only go at the head, they don't attack in the back, because the males are large, they're fat. First of all, are the females not? Does the wolf know to differentiate between males and females, and large and not large? They attack. No, the reason is that they basically, the wolves, the way they walk, they hold up their nose, they walk with their kind of swaying side to side, and it looks like they are gearing up to attack the wolves, and therefore the wolves think that they are gearing up to attack them, and therefore they attack them back. I guess we have to stop here. Okay, we'll pick up tomorrow. We do need to speak about when we're